choron ti ang hama ke yi ji wo ti Tibet ta pa Tibet ya ku yin ni pe ku se ni just
they felt was flashback from a previous life, and so he was getting bits and pieces of information and it was coming through.
아니 되게 내수지는 자원을 뭐 지지를 내내 소창아 로조지가 소쪽으로서 깔로 나와
It was necessary for him to go to India and explore that aspect of it.
I remember thinking, like, you know, this is my brother, but who is he? I have no doubt in my mind that he's a Tuka.
Tibet, land of legends and mysteries, nestled in the valleys of the highest mountains of the world. Tibet, peaceful and vulnerable land, invaded over 30 years ago by its powerful Chinese neighbor. All traces of its ancient culture wiped out, hundreds of thousands sent into exile. Amongst them, His Holiness Tenzin Jatse, 14th Dalai Lama, spiritual and temporal head of Tibet, and Nobel Peace Prize laureate. Since those dark days of 1959, the Tibetan people in exile have re-established themselves all over the world, primarily in India, where vast pieces of land were given to the Tibetans so that they might rebuild their culture and practice their spiritual life. These monasteries now hold thousands of monks, young and old, called lamas. For more than 13 centuries, Buddhism has established itself in the hearts of these people, and with it the belief in the infinite cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, where human beings imprisoned in the cycle of rebirth by the blindness and the weight of their actions try to free themselves from karma and attain enlightenment. Some amongst those who have succeeded choose, through compassion, to take rebirth amongst human beings, to help mankind continue to strive towards the light. The Tibetans call these great spiritual masters who choose to incarnate tulkus. They are enormously venerated, and their discovery from a very young age is seen to with the greatest care. Ever since the exile, a fascinating evolution has occurred in the Tibetan Buddhist traditions. Cut off from the rest of the world for centuries, the Tibetans now recognize a few of these reincarnations elsewhere, far away from their mountains and traditions. As if their ancient wisdom has, at the end of this millennium, something important to share with the rest of the world. One of these incarnations, a young man now in his 20s, is named Tenzin Sherab. Like the Tibetan children, he grew up in a cold, snowy country, not at the foot of the Himalayas, but in the streets of a large North American city. In Montreal, at the age of 4, Tenzin began to have certain unusual dreams.
At that point, Tenzin just said, I have a Geyshe too. His name is Geyshe Kunawa. Well, it sounded to me like Geyshe Kuna. And I said, yeah. And I said, who's he? And he says, he's my Geyshe. He lives on my planet.
Then he spoke about one teacher in particular and described the house where this teacher lived and his room and the pictures on the walls and so on, and the area around there, and in great detail.
I was sitting there kind of shocked because he'd never talked like that before. And those were names that I was not familiar with in Tibetan Buddhism. Mahakala, yes, but not Mahakala Nakpo and Geyshe Kuna, and I thought he was just a kid making up names. So it was actually just the way he looked and the way he was very different from just somebody telling a little story. It was almost as if he was in a kind of a wakeful dream. And I spoke to His Holiness Karmapa after about that, and he said, yes, that's what you call recall memory experience. It's like a flashback.
I kept reflecting on this story, and I said, you know, my son has quite an imagination. And he said, yeah. He said, most children have, you know, good imagination. And I said, yeah. And I said, he told a story after you left, and he said, oh, yeah. So I told him this story, and he sat right up and said, who said this? So I said, my son. So he said, well, look, this is not a child who tells stories like this. And said, who is he? So I said, he's my son, you know, he's at the house. So he said, I know these people. So he said, go and bring this child here, I want to see him. So I went back and brought Tenzin, and Tenzin told the stories to him, and he was really overjoyed, you know. And he said he's going back to India and he's going to research all these stories because he knows some of the people in these stories.
And then when he was about 8, we received a letter from him and from Sera Monastery saying that he was the incarnation, that they had contacted the state oracle, they had contacted the Dalai Lama, and that Tenzin was, they felt that Tenzin was the reincarnation of a Geyshe Jatse, who never left Tibet, who was a great practitioner of Dharma and scholar. He was a great debater, and that they wanted him in their monastery, that they wanted him to come back to Sera Monastery.
When my parents first told me that my brother was a tuku, I was just confused. You know, I didn't understand it really. All I knew was that he was just telling me such weird stuff about his dreams and these strange names that kept popping up everywhere, and that he wanted to go to a monastery. And I just thought that, you know, I didn't know. I just thought maybe the Dharma rubbed off on him too much or something.
My sister and I were told to call him a different name all of a sudden. And we had to call him by a Tibetan name, Tenzin, instead of Elijah, which we always called him Elijah. And we also were told that he was tuku, and we had to treat him with a lot of respect. And for me, that was really tough, actually. Like, I thought, what the heck is going on? I mean, first of all, I had my parents all to myself before him, right? And then suddenly, like, we have to put him on a throne and everything and treat him, like, with all this respect. And as far as I was concerned, all he did was wreck my stuff, you know, come into my room, destroy my things, and, like, have fights with me. So I thought, what's so special about him?
The excitement about the news that Tenzin had been recognized as an incarnate Lama, or that there was at least something very unusual and wonderful about him, coming from a very highly respected meditation master, gave us a very exhilarated feeling. And so we were kind of riding on that wave, you know, until this letter arrived. And the letter came from a monastery we had never heard of before, saying that since Tenzin really belongs with them, would we please return him as soon as possible?
It was kind of an honor, or it was something special, yet my whole Western side rejected it because it just goes against our tradition. You don't take a child who's 8 years old and send them off to a monastery, especially in a country like India. So the answer at that point was definitely no. So at that point we started to become very stressed out by it.
I felt very much apprehensive. I thought, like, who are these people? You know, I've never seen them or heard of them before, and suddenly they want him to go there as if he's theirs and he's not ours. So I was very confused about that.
I remember one time going up to Tenzin's room when we lived in the country just outside of Montreal, and I remember he was in his room and he was crying, and I just, it's very vivid in my mind, the scene. And I said, "What are you crying about?" And he said, "I'm crying because I can't resist my karma." And he was in the middle of writing a letter to Karma Tinley Rinpoche, the first Rinpoche to recognize him from Toronto. And I said, "Well, what are you doing?" He said, "Well, I wrote this letter." And in the letter, he says, "Dear Karma Tinley, I love you, but I can't resist my karma."
And like when a kid says something like that, it's really powerful. So she was pretty much blown away by that, and she thought, well, maybe it is his karma and he has to go. And after all, he was described by the Dalai Lama as being one of these atuku who self-recognizes, which means that he recognized himself. He brought about his own recognition through telling people the dreams that he had and talking about various events and doing these things like talking in Tibetan in his sleep and stuff. So it was all almost as if he wanted it that way. He'd planned it.
When Tenzin was, I think, 14, the Dalai Lama said, "I would like very much if Tenzin could go to his monastery now."
Tenzin was pretty much ready to either go there and begin an education or pretty much lose it, because there were no situations in North America that we could find that would accommodate him properly to develop into a Lama.
They decided for him to go, and I just felt really, really sad.
And that's when it really hit me that he was going away. So I said, "How long is he leaving for?" And she said, "Maybe 10 years, I don't know." And India seemed so far away.
I'll never forget the first time that I saw the monastery. It was nearly the size of a village.
When we brought him to the monastery, and they had a ceremony, a kind of welcoming ceremony, it was really like, I remember taking Tenzin to see the debating, and he was just, it was like he'd always been there.
I had the distinct feeling of being at home, amongst friends. I lived in a nice little house that had been built especially for me, and I found myself in the company of one of my tutors, Tupten Palge, designated by my mother to take care of me, his brother Tsulchim, who acted as a teacher, their nephew, and another young monk. I had the opportunity of meeting with other Western monks who had lived with the 1,500 people in the monastery for quite some time. They soon became my close friends.
I'm not sure if Rinpoche found it very hard to adapt, but from my point of view, I mean, it seemed that he adapted to this monastery and this country very quickly and very well.
As I see it myself, he has had no problem. He was very quick on picking up the Tibetan language.
The way he's picked up Tibetan is amazing. When he first came here, he could only say a few words, right? But now the way he's talking in Tibetan it's amazing. He's losing his usually you have an accent, right? A Canadian accent with Tibetan, right? And he's losing that now. And he seems to have made friends all over the monastery. I noticed that.
I believe he's intelligent. You know, you shouldn't tell him that I said so.
I had to adapt quickly to a very rigorous and demanding lifestyle, quite different from the one I'd been leading. Having gotten used to getting up late, going out with my friends, going to the movies, and getting to bed sometimes very late, I now had to wake up at the first light of dawn. My life in the monastery was centered around rituals, prayers, and studies. prayers lasted about 2 hours and were occasionally held in the temple of a Kangtsen, a sort of fraternity that regroups monks from specific regions of Tibet. Sera Jhe Monastery had about 15 different Kangtsens, and in order to be accepted in the monastery, it was necessary for a monk to be part of one of these groups. Geyshe Jatse, my previous incarnation, belonged to Lawa Kangtsen. Because of this, I too was part of this group. I spent the larger part of my days at home studying, taking notes, and memorizing great Buddhist texts. These dealt with philosophy and psychology, and I was surprised how easy it was for me to read and understand them. It was like déjà vu. Whenever I had difficulties in understanding a text, I would go to Tsultim. He was extremely helpful and always there. However, if I was truly able to deepen my knowledge of Buddhist philosophy, I owe it to my spiritual master, Geshe Legden. Full of compassion and wisdom, he was like a father to me. All these hours of studies were to prepare me for the most important aspect of my instruction: debate. debate deals essentially with the comprehension and discussion of important Buddhist texts and commentaries. Both rigorous and full of vigor, the debates last hours. They're even said to have lasted days. The gestures found in a debate have great significance. The right hand signifies wisdom, and the left one, logic. The clapping of the two together means that one expects an answer which is both wise as well as rational. Often, the debates are lively. They can get quite heated, each person trying his best to come out on top. But a debate never lacks in humor. We'll even push and shove each other at times, but we never go beyond the limit. Geyshe Jatse had the reputation of being one of the best debaters of Sera Monastery in Tibet. Being his reincarnation, everyone expected that I be the same. We had one day off each week, which gave me the chance to invite friends to my place. Sometimes, I would go to visit Geyshe Tashi, who had been my previous incarnation's closest disciple and was now in his 60s.
제가 내가 만들어 알리게나 내 된지 여러 텔라지 효과를 내 견을 텐데 휴스 야전다 마타 이놈 버로 인송 저는 아말람 텐데 당선스 제마 되네야 인 탄데 대표나 다들 똑바르스 제마 되네 공부하는 양식이 자기는 벌어 패면서 좀 똑바르스 가린 인사나 제마 이마이네 가주는 지금 라마 지금 그저처럼 자기는 벌써 맹다도가 대다단다 내지지 내지 맹도마다 받는 도바요 말이지 이 맹도다단게 양식이 도와 패면서 대년 다 공부하지던 자기는 벌어 개와 지금 드네 공부하던 지혜라 통면서 좀 도바요스.
Whenever I heard his stories about my former life and of Tibet prior to its invasion by the Chinese, I couldn't keep myself from thinking of the Tibetans in exile living in the camps surrounding the monastery. I admired these people. I hoped that one day they would be able to return to Tibet so they could once again resume their lives. Maybe I too would be able to go one day as a means of discovering my deepest roots, the nature of my being. Occasionally, during my days off, I got the chance to go to Mysore, a small Indian city about 2 hours' drive away. It was a nice change of scenery and also one of the only places I could get the latest music of Phil Collins. From time to time, visitors would drop by, I realized that my being a Western-born Tuku fascinated many of them.
It's not like a normal debate like in between colleges, right? Like that you have a debate where you have like a few people at the table and they sort of discuss on different points. It's the same style, except that we use it's very physical. We're using the body a lot.
How do you mean?
Using the hands and you know, like the way we we clap and stuff like that. But it's not like an applauding stuff.
No.
It's like whack. And when you want to say something, when you want to get your word in and someone else is debating, you have to sort of push him out of the way. And he'll push back, and so it's...
c'est très intéressant.
Parce que je suis incarné, l'incarnation d'un Geyshe qui est mort en 1950, 52, quelque chose comme ça. Et moi, je suis né en 72. Alors, il y a beaucoup de temps entre les deux. Mais il y a quelqu'un qui disait que je suis peut-être le troisième réincarnation de ce Geyshe.
Mais ce Geyshe a été lui-même la réincarnation de...
Non, il était un moine tout seul, quoi.
My family also came to visit. During these times, I would take off from my studies to be with them. My fondest memories are of the times we spent visiting various parts of India together. Their presence filled me with joy and gave me the strength I needed to continue my Buddhist education. The first cycle of the studies I had undertaken lasted nearly 5 years. It was finalized by a very difficult and competitive exam, the Rikchung. Only 16 monks are chosen each year to participate in this important event. I was one of these 16, and I had only 1 month to prepare myself. The big day finally came. As I prepared myself both physically and mentally, I thought about what was to come. I thought of all the work that had been put into the past 5 years of my life, all the fortunate scholars who'd taken their exams before me, all the ones who, despite their great knowledge, were not amongst those chosen to participate. I thought of my teachers, both alive and passed on, and I felt that this was to be the day I would finally be able to repay them for all they had done for me. I was glad to have my friends nearby. They had always helped me in times of need. It was these friends who made up the procession towards Sera Jhe's main temple. It seemed that each person who had participated in these exams made a mark on this temple's history. Now, it was my turn. Standing before 1,500 monks, including the abbot and the disciplinarian, I was aware of the enormous amount of pressure on me. I needed to make as few mistakes as possible, and being born in the West seemed to imply that this would be extremely difficult. I realized, despite all this pressure, I was quite calm. During the debate, I had to pay attention to my opponent's questions. They were difficult, sometimes even tricky, and I could only answer by yes or no. However, I was able to gain control of the debate and, at this point, made fun of his accent. After successfully completing the exam, a sort of congratulation ceremony typical to the Tibetan tradition was held. It was then that I actually felt the shock of having finished the first cycle of my studies. As I stare into an all-consuming ceremonial fire, I realize that though this place has become a second home for me, and despite having made lots of friends, all of it is impermanent. It is time for me to move on towards other things, strive for the fulfillment of the other dreams I left aside. I understand that my future lies in the West, where Geyshe Jatse had chosen to be reborn. I therefore make my choice to return. The Dalai Lama once said I could be of great help in bridging the gap between Tibet's ancient spiritual tradition and the modern Western world. A bridge. That is what I am in this life. That's the reason I came back.